In our presentation, we would like to discuss sustainable redevelopment strategies on just looking at an example of an existing shopping mall in Kraków, Poland. This presentation is really aimed to be a gap analysis of the historic context, the existing situation, and what can be done in the future. And what really drawn our attention to this site is that about a year ago, we've both taken part in, it wasn't really a competition, it was like an open discussion organized by the city, where different design teams submitted their concepts for a new master plan for Kraków. And in the old master plan, which is, this situation is going to be sustained in the new master plan, this area was marked as one of the 5 significant transport hubs and nodes. And it was marked as an area that would be developed on the basis of transport accessibility. Yeah? And what really drawn our attention is that there is this huge gap between legislation and master planning and architecture and putting it into practice. Yeah? So what we really want to look into, these are the areas marked on the plan of Kraków. As you can see, there's 5 of them. They're basically all connected to
the strategy was to combine mass transport to rail transport with automobile accessibility. On the intercrossing points, we have created 5 new. We call them new downtowns or something like inner city.
And by we, you mean city planners.
Yes, I was on the team which they based the concept of those nodes. Me and my professor, of course. And the strategy was to create a new activity nodes for people that commute to the city from the suburb, and also for inhabitants that live in a housing estates without public spaces.
So this slide here really shows why are we dealing with this subject and what we're looking at. Yeah, this is an extract from a city development plan. Yeah, and in the red square, there is this transit nodes marked over here, and this is the site. Yeah? And this picture was taken somewhere over here, and this really shows the current state of accessibility. It's a sort of path with sort of jaywalking involved and no pedestrian crossings, and this really illustrates why we looked into that subject and what kind of problems we'll be dealing with later.
In the history stages of this area, we noticed a few phases which are repeating in time, negative and positive. As we begin from the positive, we called it the first step. It was the closing of the factory in 1989. The factory was grounded in 1906, so it was more than 19 years old, and it was polluting the soil and area and air in a whole area of the city. And when the factory was closed, the brownfield which was created after the demolition was changed into a typical American retail mall. As you can see here, we have a former soda factory. The picture was taken in 1965.
And the location of this sodium factory, it was purely functional, because in the upper left-hand corner you can see this is a limestone quarry. This is a sorting factory. It was connected by railway. And what's not in this site is that there is also another sort of industrial hub further down south. So it was located like in between where the company would get resources from. So the location was purely functional. And once it was closed down, so this is the view of the site in 1989. It was not operational at that time. And when it was closed down, we're moving into the second phase of the process, which is the brownfield cleanup.
Now we can see how the city changes its image. We have a lot of new housing, a lot of new roads, and the former factory now as a brownfield.
What can be seen in this slide is that in the red square we have the mall, and it really, in terms of popularity, it really benefited from the fact that it's located near a major junction. It's a sort of road that leads through, that leads from south of Krakow, subsequently to the ring road, and then you could access the Silesian region and Slovakia. So it was basically located at the entrance to the city, and once the city started developing, which you could see on the left-hand side and right-hand side of the slide, you have your typical 70s, 60s blocks of flats in large quantities, and then in the 90s, a sort of rapid expansion of urban areas further down south developed because land outside of the city was more affordable, and cars became affordable as well, which really influenced how the mall works because it's accessed mainly by car, yeah? And because of the industrial remnants, you don't really have accessibility on sort of human scale in terms of getting there by foot or
it was
bike.
Typical automobile dependency.
What we're really looking at here is that because we've made, I mean, the first step was made and the brownfield was cleaned up, yeah? But the process is really an opposing process to what you have just mentioned in your presentation, which is there was no community involvement. The land was just sold to the developer, probably the highest bidder, I guess. And basically, it was oriented on just maximizing the profit without really looking into sort of further social implications and how it would affect the way that the local community worked. So the third stage, as I've mentioned, was the functioning of the retail mall, increasing automobile dependence, no direct access from site, social exclusion because you need to afford to have a car, drive there, shop there, and this really creates, and also because it's automobile oriented, there are extensive areas of parking and hardscape, and really these two dimensions, in our opinion, will contribute to creating social issues and environmental issues that we will be looking at here in our analysis and finding ways to deal with them and enhance the site, enhance the local community, enhance the way it works.
And despite the Zakopianka was located in vicinity of existing railway and also light train and bus stops, the connections between retail mall and those transport nodes was not so clear. People had to cross many levels between the bus stop and main entrance. Then we had we still have many crossing, so the access, pedestrian and bicycle access to the mall was not so clear developed.
We'll have pictures later. Maybe we should have had them sooner, but we'll have them later.
And our catalyst to redevelop this area was they are two concepts, TOD and I will talk about TOD, Jurek will talk about LEED. According to TOD 5D rules, we have design, diversity, density, destination accessibility, and distance to transit. This scheme was created by Peter Kaltorp, and it means that design have to be clear for pedestrians to use the space, the public spaces like streets, like squares. Diversity, it means that to encourage people to walk, the environment should be the best for them. I mean, public life functions like shops, workplaces and retail should be placed along the streets on the pavement to encourage people to walk. Then we have density. It means that the central core around the bus or tram stop should be the densest area, and which is decreasing when we are going outside our location. And the last one is connected with transport. First one, destination accessibility. It means that our trips, daily trips, should be reached by the simplest way, and then distance to transit should be resolved also for pedestrians, bikers, and for the most for people who have their own car.
Then what Wojciech has mentioned about transport-oriented development and LEED for neighborhood development, these two ideas are really based on the new urbanism and basically using sort of pre-automobile city concept and going back to sort of pre-automobile city development patterns. What's really worth noticing is that both of these are American concepts, yeah? And the entire sort of retail mall as such, I mean, automobile-oriented retail is also an American concept, yeah? So we figured that
the best way to,
because the problem is, the genera of the problem is located in really adopting this model without a critical analysis, and therefore we looked at research, American research from, let's say, a period of 20, 30 years, and how we could apply that. And on the basis of TOD and LEED, we looked at the core concepts in these two models that could be then applied to the site. Yeah? And we've discussed TOD, and basically what we looked at with LEED neighborhood development is, I mean, LEED is a rating system, and it's not really, it's more of a set of guidelines, a generic guidelines for creating a sustainable neighborhood, yeah? And we're looking at three categories here, which is location and linkage, which means emphasis on sustainable modes of transport, walking, using a bicycle, using public transport, car sharing, etc. We look at neighborhood and pattern design, which means that in order to have a lively and thriving neighborhood, you basically have to provide an opportunity for mixed functions, mixed income society, a lot of diversity, and create a common ground for social interaction. And you can't really have that in a neighborhood that is not diverse, should I say, yeah? And infrastructure in buildings is really looking at the very sort of building level and how to design it, how to operate it, how to connect it to the community in order to create a thriving neighborhood. Yeah. So we looked at both of these concepts at a more detailed level, but what we really wanted to avoid is to take the concepts as they are and apply them to the site, because that would be more of a design exercise and we would need to have a really specified outcome. Yeah? So what we've done is we've analyzed these concepts and found 5 major aspects that, using sort of these categories, we will be looking at the site and the mall, analyzing where the downfalls are and what could be addressed, and therefore just using these aspects to address the issues would then or could then be applied as a generic model or a basis for a generic model, because it's not really that thorough. And the first step that we wanted to discuss is open parking replacement with infill. And what we have here is a situation where we have a readily available investment land that has all the infrastructure that is underused, that is only used in the rush hour, and replacing that with infill buildings. That's even a better slide. This is taken from the Congress of New Urbanism paper, Grapefruits to Goldfields. And what it shows is that in your typical shopping mall, you have the interior shopping streets, and taking that to the exterior and basically turning the mall inside out to create open facades and enhance interaction. Another issue is continuous street network. I'm sure you're all familiar with that image of suburban malls with basically pedestrian crossings leading from street to street and not sufficient amount of public spaces, sidewalks, pedestrian paths. Another example, this is a pedestrian connection leading to a transit stop, which is quite sad, by the way, the picture on the right-hand side. Another thing is human scale. Yeah? Obviously, a plane of concrete has nothing to do with human scale, as you only have sheds for the trolleys and nothing else. Another issue is accessibility. And this is a funny picture of ground level entrances, yeah. And it was a part of the building that was preserved, and even though you had an open facade with windows, it was basically covered with pictures or commercials of Intersport, yeah. Another thing connected to accessibility, which we kind of found striking, is that you only have 2 entrances, yeah. And the scale of the entrances kind of implicates that this is some sort of a significant sort of public building, like you would have, for example, in the picture on the left-hand side, which is the Opera in Copenhagen. Yeah? And this is kind of similar scale, yeah. Okay. Another issue that I'm sure you all know is, again, only 2 entrances and lack of ground level entrances in the front facade and no street-facing retail.
Another one is biodiversity. It means we have to interconnect existing greenery to preserve local species and to have more greenery in public spaces. Another one is alternative transport. In this picture on the left, we have a single man that wanted to reach a bus stop, but probably he didn't know which way to choose, because there is it's a
By the way, I didn't wait for him to show up the entire day. It was just a random snap while we were here several times. So this is a sort of typical situation. And on the right-hand side, you can see a person that's driving a bicycle through the car parking.
Because
again, lack of infrastructure.
There is no bike paths, no clear pedestrian paths, and no visual signs how to reach the bus stop or how to reach the main entrance.
Okay, these are the 5 areas summarized, and what we really wanted to show in this paper and focus on is that the gap that I've mentioned between master planning and just sort of stating that this is going to be a transit hub and we're going to develop this area on the basis of transport, but what's really missing is the analysis, the research and the education and the stakeholder involvement between the master planning and the practice. And as you can see, it has its upsides, but in a context of transit-oriented development, the site is far from perfect. And just looking at these areas, we would aim to maybe lay grounds for a more reoccurring universal strategy. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Questions, Stephen?
As far as I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're taking American way of development and American tools to change development, and you apply them in European conditions, in European scale. Do you think that's correct? That's right?
These theories were based on the fact that I think the US is experiencing this problem in a bigger scale, yeah? And because you would have, in the US, you would have more land and cheaper fuel and more affordable cars, yeah? You use them, and basically, on the basis, the core idea of new urbanism and just going back to the proven sort of design patterns are sort of connected to the European city type, yeah? But because they have, so they're basically, if you look at pedestrian access, if you look at density, if you look at diversity, that's what you have here outside, yeah, in Prague, for example. And this is the sort of historic idea that's behind this notion of TOD and media. But because this problem occurred by Eastern Europe adopting this development pattern without really any sort of critical analysis or stakeholder involvement, yeah? And what we're experiencing now is what was experienced in the US, I don't know, say some 15 to 10 years ago, yeah? So ironically, we would need to use this experience to address these issues that we're facing here, yeah?
And another thing is that if I understood, I don't know, so I understood that you read the TOD and the LED tool, and you picked up from them just few ideas, and you don't use the whole tool, because as a whole system, because for example the lead is really the whole system based on some norm, American laws or what?
I'm just saying, yeah.
Or norms or I don't know. So I'm just asking if you are trying to use the whole system or just you picked up some of ideas that you presented.
I also work as a lead consultant, and this is not a typical situation yet, because lead for neighborhood development is basically aimed to be used with new developments, yeah. And in this, and if you look at the existing malls and existing buildings and how the system is structured, and if you really get into that, it kind of is a very sort of technical building level stuff that, of course we could use that, but we would have a 2-hour presentation, yeah, in order to do that. But there are some core concepts that are common to LEED and TOD and new urbanism, and from these concepts you could really look at sort of general level analysis, yeah.
Because TOD is based on typical historic European city with tree-lined street, public spaces dominated by pedestrians, and that's why we were searching for a cure which can provide us those historical patterns.
And because we've taken that concept, or the concept was brought to us by developers and investors from the US, just based on that model, we weren't really experiencing that problem before that the American malls were experiencing 20 years ago, 10 years ago now, So there was, I mean, if you look at the way that LEED works and is structured, is really a response to that situation, And this situation is reoccurring right now in Eastern Europe, Which is why we decided that it would be worthwhile to really analyze that in order to use the experiences that are and research that's already in there,
In general, that's my thesis, why would we build more, if the population is not growing?
No.
Why is this an approach to build?
Population in southern Poland is growing, so the aim to reach more density around transport node instead of rebuilding the suburban areas and taking land for new development was to use as a catalyst transport around the cheapest field in the city, parking lots, open parking lots.
And it's really aimed on using the existing infrastructure, because you have the rainwater infrastructure, you have roads, you have electricity, you have gas, you have basically everything you need to develop, And on the other hand, you have a mall that's only working during sort of afternoon, sort of rush hour peak period, and in the weekends. And after that, this mall is a site of just sort of illegal street racing, drifting, and all that, And what we really want to look at the point of this exercise, was to look at the experiences, the US experiences, and find ways to enhance that site, And the first sort of step that we suggested is mixed use and introducing new functions, because if you have, for example, housing and offices and retail, there will be different peak periods of activity, there will be pedestrian spaces, and therefore it's economic, the social interaction is enhanced, and at the same time it's economically valid, because you have this readily available land that is fairly cheap to develop, and it's within the city, so you're not actually contributing to sort of expanding the city borders, but you're looking at what's in there and what we have available, and really enhancing that, And how it will look like in reality, I think that what Mr. Hansen here showed in his presentation was a good example of sort of mixed-use, diverse neighborhood, in Pittsburgh. But if you look at the neighborhood level, British system, BREEAM has a similar sort of neighborhood certification system. What it really is, it's more of a set of guidelines on how to develop lively neighborhoods. And if you look at, people have different, behavior patterns, or you may have different sort of social patterns, different incomes, etc. But if you really look at the space that feels comfortable to the people, it doesn't really matter whether it's American or not, And because they've had this experience with shopping malls, and they addressed it, that's why we looked at it. And if you really look at LEED, it's really consensus driven, So it's just people from the industry that are dealing with it, work on it until there is a consensus on how the guidelines should be formulated,
What I wanted to ask, I read an interview with the retail developers recently from Czech Republic, and what they said that this is actually the only model of a shopping mall that kind of works. That you put some kind of box outside of the city and you let people come to it by cars. And it's the only thing that actually makes business for retail in the Czech Republic.
in these years.
In a 5-year scale, 10-year scale, or now, or how's it
Don't remember. But for me, it was like, okay, so building like smaller shopping malls, maybe somewhere included in the city structure, that's not really good business for them. So is this the way we go? So I'm wondering if in Poland maybe is the trend the same, or?
I guess that what you're really looking at is if you take a piece of land, add extra functions, add housing, add offices, you would have a more diverse community, and therefore, you would have jobs that are readily available. You wouldn't have to drive a car, and therefore, if you look at it from the commercial point of view, you would have a more sustainable model of just customers coming in and buying goods. Yeah. I guess what you're like looking at here with the model of the mall that is located in the Spyrka is that you have cheap, readily available land that you can just buy and develop without any constraints. Yeah. And this approach here, you have a community that's in there and that's been in there for years around it. Yeah. And I guess that it would require more input from the developer's side to actually sit down and just talk and what should be in there. But eventually, I think that this model would really enhance the economical model that you're referring to. Yeah.
At what point in time do you decide this is so fundamentally flawed as a typology that we simply shouldn't have it?
I think 1-2 years after the opening of the mall, we have seen those issues that people they had problems with how to get to the mall. For a few years, the mall had a shuttle bus between those tram and bus stops and the main entrance of the mall. But when a crisis came, it was too expensive, so people they had to go by foot simply.
And what we're also looking at is that in retail you have these lease cycles. Yeah, that there is a shop coming in and leases out the space for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, etc. Yeah, and the mall was delivered in 1996, and we have 2013, which means that there were roughly 2 lease cycles with tenants coming in and out. Yeah, and what you can see now is that the more sort of high-end stores are steadily replaced with the cheap ones, affordables, etc. Yeah, which I think reflects the question that was asked previously about how this model could really enhance the economic model of the functioning of the mall. Yeah, and if you have a better community, then at the end of the day you also have sort of better customers. Yeah.
Well, the 2 examples that I showed, one, there is that downcycling. The generic paradigm similar to what you have here, although it's strip commercial, not a mall, there is that downcycling of the retail businesses because they're not able to continue to attract. It's an unsustainable model. In the first example that I was giving, there is churn, but the churn actually is more about businesses growing and relocating to bigger spaces, and then other businesses go into where they were. So, and it fits into the fabric, so there are even some businesses that used to be in older buildings that have moved into the new buildings, and there are some businesses that have moved from the new buildings into spaces in some of the older buildings. So there's this intermixing. There's a different kind of flexibility in the fabric when it's integrated into the as it's getting referred to as this mixed-use fabric. This is totally monolithic and monofunctional.
Maybe if you could consider, if you talk about community, combination of retail and offices, right? And that it would enhance community or something like that. I'm not quoting you, but in that sense, something you said. I think that's a bit too optimistic and a bit too naive to think, because I think if you talk about connecting people with retail, it's more like a local shop or something where people know each other. You go to a grocery store and you say hello, but a sense of community in a place where you have a supermarket and where you have an office building, and You know, like it's.
I totally agree with you. You're 100% right.
But then, how do you? I mean, see that in your model, or how would you? What kind of strategy would you?
I mean, the theme of this conference is landscape transformation, yeah?
Mhm.
And we must acknowledge the fact that this is the way that the landscape in Central and Eastern Europe was transformed, yeah?
Mhm.
I would love to go back to the model where we have sort of dense communities and shopping streets and everyone knows each other, yeah? But we have spaces like this, I mean, all over, I don't know about Czech Republic, yeah, because this is like the second time I've been
It's
there.
everywhere. It's the same.
Because we have spaces like this everywhere, yeah? And if you, I don't mean to offend you, but if you take the model that you suggested and want to apply it to this particular situation, it's not going to happen, yeah?
No,
Because you
that's
have to,
not- yeah.
we're not saying that it's perfect, but we're saying that this is a situation that really need to face, yeah?
But
And
then I
if you look
wouldn't
at,
use the words that you were saying, that you would enhance the social, something like that, social layer or social type.
I mean, if you define enhancement as baseline and whatever happens after the intervention, yeah, of I don't know, the quality of the local community, yeah, and the spaces in there, I would say that this model would really enhance the community, yeah. I don't know, maybe that's not the correct wording, I don't really want to.
It's a first step to create a new society.
Is there a concrete plan if it will happen gradually, like in phases, and how far in the future are we looking at?
I mean, are we talking about the master planning and the regulations that are currently being considered in Krakow, yeah, as by the local authorities, or about this model?
Oh, well, as I understood, it still functions as a shopping mall.
Yeah,
Yes, and it will be.
And it will stay. It will
Yes,
remain a shopping mall.
we just suggest the.
This is how it looks like.
Yes.
This is the way it functions.
And do you want the parking lot? You want to turn
Change
the
it.
parking lot into something else?
Yes.
What about cars that are like weekends?
According to lead guidelines, parking spaces should be located, I think, around.
I mean, I would say that it's an economical exercise, yeah? If you look at the value of the land and what can be in there, and let's say the value of building a multi-story parking structure, I would say that it would be, or I mean, American research shows that it's economically valid, yeah? Maybe it would be different in this part of the world. And how long will it take? I mean, it's a theoretical exercise.
In theory.
It will take us 2 years to find an investor and 5 years to build. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, it will really be, yeah.
Eastern part, then like.
It will really need to be a gradual process because at the end of the day, it's economics that's driving it. Yeah. So I don't really see this happening as a one-time process. Yeah.
In the rest of the city, like the infrastructure and the way the city grows, as I understood.
Yeah.
But only around these transport nodes, where the accessibility is the highest, on the highest level.
And I mean, the whole reason and purpose of this exercise is that, as we've said, we've taken part in this urban planning sort of discussion competition about the new master plan for Krakow, yeah? And what's really missing is that the authorities say that this area should be developed around transport, yeah? But what's in there is what we presented, and that really would prevent this site from developing, yeah? So we feel that this theoretical exercise will be valid in terms of bridging the gap between what's in the master plan and what is the practice, yeah?
So now, because we have to go further, I would ask, and thank you guys.
Apologies for